And now, please welcome Peter Racine to the pulpit as he continues our interesting series in Connections.
Thank you, Donna. I think we could have just ended on that beautiful meditation, right? Because it's certainly a perfect example of positive connections. And today I want to talk a little bit about what we look at and how we deal with negative or toxic connections. Negative and toxic connections really do harm our spiritual and mental health. At our core, we want inner peace, right? And we tend to avoid conflict. As spiritual and moral beings, we strive for unity and we work for social justice. Inner peace, unity, and social justice are being attacked by people intentionally trying to break positive connections with toxic ones. I had a conversation with one of our members about a family member that was on the extreme opposite politically and very vocal about it. There was no rational discussion. There was no give and take dialogue. There was no acceptable version other than the side of the political equation that this person was on. She was right, and everybody else who disagreed with her was wrong. Now, the question was, how do you maintain your own personal integrity in responding to her or not responding to that person? In our discussion, we concluded that there was no right or wrong, but no amount of discussion would result in anything positive. So in this case, maintaining your integrity meant keeping a superficial relationship and ignoring the bait of engaging in a political argument in order to maintain harmony within the extended family. This is an example of being intentional in recognizing how we deal with toxic or negative relationships. Like I mentioned, there's no right or wrong, but there's a lot at stake, both for us individually, in our core being, and as a congregation. In the 2016 election, after the election, one poll found that 7% of the voters lost or ended a friendship because of the election, and that many people chose not to be friends with people across the political divide. And this has only gotten worse since then. We live in a polarizing environment in our state, in our nation, and in the world. So folks on the extremes try to show how divided we are, right? How different we are from one another, and frankly, how evil some are for being different. This polarization comes from both sides. Those who are for women's right to choose regarding abortion are called baby killers. Those who want to protect Social Security and Medicare are called socialists. Those that want to protect the rights of all regarding sexual orientation and gender equality are called groomers. Those that want to protect the rights of blacks in voting are called woke. Like that's a bad thing. So I would say that, I could say nearly everyone, but I might say everyone in this room and on Zoom today and in our members in Nassau County, that everyone believes in something for which an extreme person would call us un-American. And it seems that the extremes have grown in numbers, so the middle ground of acceptance is shrinking. Now, Unitarian Universalists are progressive, promoting liberty and freedom. But there are certainly a number of UUs who would consider themselves conservatives, fiscally and politically. And that is what plurality is all about, e pluribus unum, the Latin which translates to out of many, one, or one from many. This is the traditional motto of the United States, appearing on our Great Seal. Yet I think that motto is under attack. Now, I think that Unitarian Universalists are generally tolerant of others. But as I have joked, and I've shared this for me personally, I am generally a tolerant person, but I recognize that I am intolerant of the intolerant. And I'm not very tolerant of those that want to keep ignorant so that they can continue to believe false truths and adhere to bigotry and prejudices. I just know that's in me. I am not tolerant of someone that is intolerant. And so sometimes I have to back myself off and not be overreactive. But I will tell you, and just to understand this from a psychological term, a perspective, when people are negative or toxic, it is not about you. It is not about me. We tend to take things personally, particularly if someone attacks us personally. But 99% of it, if not 100, is about them. And they express themselves out of their fear, out of their hatred, out of ways they were raised, to belief systems that they will not give up. But it has nothing to do with you or me. But we are the recipients of it. So, as sometimes my wife Kelly and I say when we get into go into a meeting, we go shields up, okay? In other words, this is going to be, could be a toxic environment, right? It could be a negative environment. So just protect yourself. Connections are like energy. Energy is neither good or bad. It's just energy. However, how we perceive that energy between ourselves and another person, that does reflect how we feel about it. Now, we connect with people at a certain place and certain time in our lives. We change. People change. Relationships change. They ebb and flow over time. And sometimes they end and restart much later. Our interests change, and our relationships often revolve around our interests. We form relationships here. We form relationships, the women's group, the spiritual studies, playing with ideas. We form relationships cleaning on the cleanup day. Those are where we form our relationships here. That's natural. Some get stronger, some go away. But what about relationships that do become negative, that are draining, disconcerting, and, although sometimes we don't recognize it, harmful to us? Some of the most vulnerable and hurtful connections are with people that we loved at one time, and perhaps still do. Many of us have dealt with a family member or a friend in an abusive relationship. It may be emotional or physical abuse due to domestic violence, alcoholism, or drug addiction. And we ask ourselves, and often them directly, why can't they see the harm being done to themselves in this relationship, and often their children? Studies in domestic violence show that on average it takes 7 times for a victim of domestic violence to permanently leave the perpetrator. And sometimes it's on those times that the victim is killed by the perpetrator. So the way some have to deal with toxic relationships is not to be judged. It's to have empathy and understand. They may be making the decisions in the best way they know how to protect themselves and sometimes their children. That's why Hubbard House and so many other programs are there to help guide and protect the person as they make important decisions to protect themselves. And while that might sound like an extreme, it really isn't. Both those that have tried to protect the right of abortion or those that are against abortion have been threatened and killed. The attack on Congress and the connections that we make as a nation to be a democratic institution resulted in injury and death. Many of our law enforcement officers that were at the congressional building that day are still suffering from trauma. So the environment that is toxic is there. I want to talk to us about individuals first and our own individual relationships. So when a relationship is marked by negativity, inconsistency, or where you're not listened to and where your vulnerability is not respected, We need to be aware of that. That can be with a spouse, a sibling, a friend, a colleague at work. In his book, Friendship in the Age of Loneliness, Adam Smiley Poswalski said this advice: real friendship isn't doing everything your friends ask of you. Real friendship is honesty and taking care of your needs first. Saying no more often will help you to say yes to the things and the people that matter most. Now, I know we have some therapists and counselors here that could speak to this much better than me, but the important thing is self-awareness. Here's the deal. If you care about someone, you have to carve out time and space to be with them. Plain and simple, he says. Go deep rather than wide. When we're in college or younger, we want everybody to be our friends. But when we get older, we realize that not everybody has to be our friends. And even our friends don't have to like each other. That's up to them. It's their responsibility. The best friendships are the ones that have space to grow on their own, commit to one-on-one, lead to intimacy, depth, and growth. That's the relationships you want. We find those relationships in our partnerships, our marriages. We find those relationships among our closest friends, family members, and groups. Now, can you repair a broken relationship? I think the first question to ask is deciding whether you want to try to repair a broken relationship or you want to just let it end. First, ask yourself, if you want to repair it, try to understand what are the issues, what's attacking your soul, your core in this relationship. You know, alcohol, drugs, age, mental health issues, emotional changes, physical pain, they all cause personality changes in a person. They may not be the same person you first met. They may not be the same person you knew a year ago. If the relationship is becoming abusive, manipulative, toxic in ways that are hurtful, then maybe now is not the time to repair it, and maybe it never will be. This is hard with a family member, a sibling. As we go through the aging process, sometimes our siblings grow apart, or again, grow more extreme. It makes it harder for us. So maintaining your integrity and wholeness is not only your priority, it's your responsibility. We need to be in control of our energy and not be a victim. If someone attacks you for being Unitarian Universalist, chances are all the reasons that they're attacking you are correct. We'll start there. We're all going to hell, the beer is going to be warm. Okay, we're okay with that. And so what I found is that we can be more gentle with ourselves in someone that attacks. That does not mean we have to just lie down and take it. We can say, well, just remember, right? How many people believed in all of the Greek gods and all the Roman gods, right? You wouldn't believe that today, but the majority did. So the majority may believe one way, but it doesn't mean it's the right way. And it's not attacking them, it's just explaining that. And many times the majority turned out not to be right. Well, we're right. No. Okay, so you can say that if you want. It's up to you. Got to be a little Jersey sometimes. Okay, so we control ourselves, our own energy. It is ours. It belongs to us. And that means recepting energy, too, from someone else and not be the victim. So you can take a break. You can reset your friendship. Maybe the person will come back in a new season of your life when you least expect it. On the other hand, while it might feel tempting to dump a friend who has wronged you, it's worth considering. And he goes on to talk about you could do a reconnection plan. In a reconnection plan, two friends might tell each other what isn't working, take responsibility for where they failed to show up for each other, and discuss how they're willing to change in order to mend the friendship. And That's important because sometimes it really is important. And I remember someone told me, going through a difficult situation, he said, if I am judged on the worst day of my life, as opposed to all of the other days of my life, then that's really not fair. And sometimes the worst days of your life, something might be said or done that could be hurtful to someone else. But it was one moment. And a lot of times, there can be reconciliation. On the other hand, if you decide not to, we could just ghost the person, ignore them, right? And sometimes you have to. But if there's a reason you don't want to spend time with that person, it's okay to say it. And again, in a non-judgmental person, because you're protecting your own self. You could try this. It's really nice to see you, or thanks for the call. Right now, I'm spending most of my energy focused on whatever you're focused on. And I can't make a plan, but I'll reach out in a few months when I have more space. And again, that gives that person that time to understand. It does require more energy, believe me, to do that. But in the long term, it might be healthier for you. And really, when I talk about us, both as individuals and as a congregation, I really think, again, what is our spiritual, mental, physical health? That's what the perspective I come from in giving this talk this morning. When you have an issue with someone else, Casper ter Kuile, the author of The Power of Ritual, and his partner, Angie Thurston, in the Sacred Design Lab, suggests 4 questions. What is the issue as I understand it? What is the vision I would like to see for the future? What action I might take to make it happen? And what risk might that action involve? So it's understanding, being aware, deciding what would you see the vision to look like? What steps would you and maybe the other person have to do? And what risk do you take by even being open about it? And then by taking those steps. We can't predict the outcome. We can only be in the present moment of how we plan for that outcome. So as individuals, we can do those steps. As a congregation, let me spend a moment on that. External pressures tend to unite groups together. Internal conflict can tear a group apart, and that's true for us. So that's why our congregation has a covenant to help us maintain our relationships in love and respect, even when we disagree. And sometimes people have disagreed, have left the church. And I think about that because there's not too many other Unitarian Universalist churches you can go to around here, right? And so it's not like you can just pick up and go down the street. And so I think it's important that if you were back in grade school, that if you disagree or lose, you don't take your marbles and go home. You stay within it because that's our covenant, that's our relationship. Our board and each committee here also has a charter that calls us to respect one another and embrace differences of opinion. In fact, having differences of opinion is what makes us stronger. So what I want us to do as a congregation is understand that toxic relationships externally are one thing, but internally, just make sure we recognize that in ourselves and recognize that we are going to be strong-feelinged about certain things. No one disagrees with me on that one, right? No, we are strong-feelinged about certain things. We're pretty strong-feelinged about everything. But remember, as our spoken affirmation says, we're on this journey to the end so that all souls, that's us, shall grow into harmony with the divine, the one, that's us. So we've got a long road together, okay? And it's better if we get along on that road, okay? Sitting on the Greyhound bus next to the person next to you, all right? We're going to have good energy and good connections because we're going to be intentional about doing that here. And that doesn't mean we disagree. Everybody should have their right to opinions, to the democratic process here, and to their own search for truth or meaning. That is, to me, that's our Bible, okay? The toxic world is not going to go away either. As we engage with the world, it gets exhausting. Just watching, listening to the news. So I want us to give ourselves self-care. If you're watching the news at 11, I recommend you don't do that. It does not give you a good night's sleep. Seeing the last murder, accident, ex-president, not saying which one, on the news might, give you some angst. It might not. So relax. You're not the savior of the world. Do your part, but allow others to do their part. Engage as you are emotionally able. Don't burn yourself out. That's just ego. Finally, make sure your inner connection is positive. The meditation that Donna said was so important, so meaningful to me, because self-care is first and foremost self-care. It's important. It is the energy that flows within our core. Is that positive? Is there any useless anxiety, stress, guilt, concerns that need to be released? Then release them. That's the energy that you project on others. Every night before I go to sleep, I read this quote from Emerson. It says, "Finish each day and be done with it. You have done what you could. Some blunders and absurdities have crept in. Forget them as soon as you can. Tomorrow is a new day. You shall begin it serenely and with too high a spirit to be encumbered with your old nonsense." Now I add, and there'll be plenty of blunders and absurdities tomorrow. So stay tuned. So let's practice positive connections within ourselves, in our family and friends, especially here in our church, and in our relationships with the world. We're going to do our part to make this world a better world. But remember, we cannot save the world. We can just do our part. I want you to hopefully have heard today that we need to be intentional to avoid negative and toxic connections. If we are aware of those, we will be spiritually, mentally, and physically healthier. Thank you.